What's up, my fellow emo, pop punk, metalcore music lovers? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your alt-rock music scene fix. And we are back with our very first episode of 2025. I hope everybody had a good holiday, a good new year, and the alternative music scene provided some early albums for us. So we're going to take a look at some of those. I got 3 to talk about today. I got an EP to talk about. And then we're going to talk about something new that came out this week. And we're going to just very briefly touch on something called Sneezecore. I hope y'all are excited for that. I know that was something not on my bingo card for 2025, but definitely an interesting song and a really cool band that I checked out already in regards to that. And then we're going to finish just talking about a few of the bands that I expect to release some music this year, bands that I potentially expect to take a pretty significant leap this year. I did that on a whole podcast last year, but I think this year is a little bit strange in that respect, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. But in the meantime, as always, all of my socials are going to be linked in the description of this episode: Instagram, X, and TikTok at Matrix Music Review. Head on over and follow me on all those platforms. I'm the most active over on Instagram, where actually today I just announced a bunch of shows that are coming out. This was like the first big announcement and big wave of tour dates. So you can stay up to date on all the tour announcements over there, as well as get in tune with the playlist, Control-Alt-Save 25, which just released today as well. That is available on Spotify. I am still working on getting that to come to Apple Music, but it is available right now on Spotify, featuring some of the artists in this episode, as well as some other ones that I'm listening to lately. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Music, please leave a 5-star review. Leave me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing with this. And as I mentioned in our last episode, we are on YouTube now. So go over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel. And as we get more subscribers over there, who knows, maybe we'll start doing some video content this year as well. So with that, we're going to jump right into our album reviews. And the first one we're going to talk about is Cursed by Paleface Swiss. This is the third album from the Swiss outfit, and this is an album that I can say is heavy, hardcore, and there's a lot of emotional charging that goes on in this particular album. I feel like a lot of the screams feel extremely emotional, and almost with some of them you get like these almost whimpers at the end where you can just feel the emotion behind the lyrics that are coming out. You can feel the emotion behind the screams and behind the content that's coming in these songs. And even sometimes it almost feels like maniacal laughing. And you'll see that all throughout this album. And you get that right away on a song like Hatred. Hatred is basically a track all about how fucked this world is right now, and how basically you hate everything about this world, and the hate that you have is the last thing to die in this hopeless world. That's actually the last line of the track, is my hate is last to die in this hopeless world, with just like a mini breakdown at the end. And that is so fun, because then it flows right into almost this stream of consciousness track about not holding on to hope and not having hope. And it really goes to show the creativity of a band like Paleface Swiss, because they could stick to what they're very good at. These heavy riffs, these heavy screams, and these breaks, and all these different things, but they also switch it up and they give you some of those more spoken tracks like this. They give you a very slow song to end the album. And it just kind of shows the range that a band like this has. And I think that's something that doesn't always happen in the hardcore scene, doesn't always even happen in the alternative music scene for that matter, where there's a lot of times where bands just get into this very safe zone and they just do what they are good at. They do what they need to do. There's never anything flashy, never anything different. It's just always kind of the same thing. And I can very confidently say that Paleface Swiss did not have that problem on this album. And again, the creativity throughout this album is something that really stood out and was something that I wrote down in my notes like right away. You get the creativity in a line like, "Did I stutter? Because I want you to die." Like, those are things you wouldn't expect "die" to be the word that somebody stutters on. Or, for that matter, the I to be the piece that stuttered. You would expect it to be the D, but they change it up. They make it a little bit different. They switch it to their way. And then they also show some creativity on a song like Enough. Enough is this big fuck you to the classic jerk bigot population and all these people that think they are so much better than everybody else and that their way is the best way, and they're just very pretentious, and enough is basically the way I looked at this song. Like, enough is enough. But my favorite track on this album is only about 1 minute and 39 seconds. And it's called My Blood's on Your Hands. This 1 minute and 39 seconds is almost like a horror film. If you watch the music video, that's exactly what it looks like. But even throughout just the listening experience, it feels like a horror movie. It feels like this darkness, this despair, this, I don't even know what to call it, but it also has potentially the most vile scream, blah, gargle that I've ever heard in a track at 1 minute and 19 seconds. Do yourself a favor and go over to my playlist, put this song on, and go straight to about 1 minute and 15 and listen to this specific gargle blah that I'm talking about. If you really want to make sense of what this sound is, go watch the video. It's basically somebody choking on blood. And I had not watched the video when I listened to the track, and so it was like, oh my God, this is just an unbelievable, unreal sound. What the hell was this? And then when you get the video that accompanies it, it makes a lot of sense that, like, okay, it's somebody kind of like gargling on blood. Makes a lot of sense. And again, you get these very heavy, these very horror-filled vibes. And then at the very end, they hit you with this very smooth track. There's no screams. It's very much a melodic track to finish the album off. And it really just ties everything together and pulls it in and just says, to me, it feels like, we went through all of this chaos together, but at the other side of chaos, there's always going to be this peace that you find. And that's a really cool thing for a band like Paleface Swiss to finish an album that's so heavy and so hardcore off with this more melodic side and show their range that, it just made it such a great way for me to start off the year. And so this band starts off the year extremely strong. It's something a little different, but for me, this is a solid 8.2 out of 10 and a really good way to start off the year. If you're looking to catch them live, they are getting ready to go out on tour with Nasty and the next band that we're going to talk about, which is Stick to Your Guns. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Cursed by Paleface Swiss. So the next album up is Keep Planting Your Flowers by Stick to Your Guns. So as mentioned before, these guys are on tour with Paleface Swiss, and this is their 8th studio album from the hardcore band. And to me, this sounds like an 8th album, and I really don't want that to come off as a dig or a diss about Stick to Your Guns, because what I mean by it sounds like an 8th album is that they know what they're doing. They've got themselves a very polished product. They have a pretty expected product here. And for me, it's very simple to see why and how they've been doing this for as long as they have been and why they've been so successful. You look at a song like Invisible Rain, which really just talks about how you have a life scorched with flame and fury. And you get some lyricism on display throughout this album, where you get lines like, life is a class war, but peace is worth fighting for. I've been rejected by rats and accepted by fate, but don't fall for the trap. All these different things are not super difficult to think about. They're not super hard for someone to just sit there and say, like, oh, I was rejected by the rats, but at the same time, I'm accepting my fate and I'm falling for the trap. Those are pretty easy to understand topics, but at the same time, it's an effective delivery here from Stick to Your Guns. And I think one of the songs that really drives home the artistry and the long-term ability and the staying power from Stick to Your Guns is the title track, Keep Planting Your Flowers. It's such an emotional track when you dig into some of the lyricism about how the person was really never invisible to you, but they always felt invisible, and you just got to keep planting flowers on them. And it really does make you stop and think about those things. Like, even though we may not think somebody's invisible, they may feel invisible, or they may feel like they're not important. And so, are we telling them that enough? Are we focusing on them enough? Are we helping them enough? And then the album really just ends with 2 features. One, the first one really I wouldn't count so much as a feature just because it's kind of short, featuring Terror. And I think that's a totally fine track. But the second one, Hate for You with CU Space Cowboy, is so solid. And you guys know how I feel about CU Space Cowboy. They were one of my top albums last year. And the track itself is so solid, and I think that's really just the word that comes to mind when I start thinking about what I think about this album in total. It's solid. I don't really have a ton to say about it. You guys know when I don't say a ton about an album, it's not that I dislike it. It's not that I, have this serious disdain for it. It's just that sometimes there's not much to say in terms of an album, especially this early on in the year. A lot of times it's easy to say, I'm going to compare it to this album from this genre or this album or that album. And right now, the only thing we really have to compare it to is Paleface Swiss. And those are 2 completely separate bands, 2 completely separate thought processes, 2 completely separate styles. So it's not fair for me to pit them against each other. I think it is pretty cool that they're going on tour with each other. And I think it just opens up avenues for that scene as well. So really solid album from Stick to Your Guns. I'm going to give this about a 7.7 out of 10. If you have not checked it out yet, go check out Keep Planting Your Flowers by Stick to Your Guns. The last album I want to talk about is Extremely Fragile Human Being by Good Hangs. And this is an album that was released right at the tail end of 2024. It was literally released on December 27th. So for our purposes, it is going to be eligible for top album of 2025. And top songs, anything like that. And I really think it's important to talk about this album because at the end of the year, it becomes very easy to fall into the trap of finding those types of playlists that I create of the best songs, the best albums of 2024, and really just kind of giving the year a proper send-off and just listening to those tracks. Or a lot of people are into the holiday tracks and just listening to Christmas music and things like that. And so a lot of times you see a lull in new releases. You see basically from December till about mid-January or even February, that there's not a whole lot in terms of new albums or new music that comes out. But Good Hangs releases this new album, and immediately I fell in love. I fell in love with this album. And I've been a big fan of Good Hangs since I've come across them several years ago. And a lot of the tracks on here are ones that I had put on the playlist last year. We had Shoot Your Way Out. That was one that I put on there. As well as I Can't Make Friends Like I Used to. There were a couple different ones that really stood out. And I was like, okay, these are obviously really good tracks. And I wasn't sure if Good Hangs was going to go the album route or were they going to go the EP route. What were they going to do? I wasn't really quite sure. And so I was really surprised and really happy to get an album like this. But I think the thing that stood out the most to me were the non-single tracks on here. When we look at the singles, they're really solid, they're really strong. But for me, the first song that stopped me dead in my tracks was Skate By. If you listen to the first verse of this track, it literally is a definition of what your life would have been like potentially as a 18 to 25-year-old in the past couple of years. Got a half hour sleep, stayed up all night playing Call of Duty, washing your hair with Head and Shoulders, and listening to Joe Rogan. That pretty much describes a lot of the male population, I feel like, anymore. So you hear that, and it's something that you connect with, right? It's something that you really feel like there's some sort of real peace with you. And then when you hear the chorus, it's talking about how you want to clock out of your mind and really just skate by in life. And I think that's something that I've really kind of appreciated lately, is that, you know, you don't always have to be the most flashy person. You don't always have to be the most dedicated person, but even those that show up late to work some days, even those that are trying to do different things, or in my case, like I'm trying to do and build this community for podcasting. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. It doesn't have to be the thing that everybody flocks to. But you know what? If I'm skating by and I'm living my life and being happy, then that's really all that matters. And I feel like that's something that's always stood out to me about Good Hangs, is that they have this really good sense and this really innate ability to capture what people are feeling, how people are doing things, and just the average day-to-day life of someone that is growing up in a world where we had this alternative music scene, and it might not be what it used to be in terms of mainstream, but you know what? We're still a strong scene. We're still I'm using one of their songs here, a local scene where everybody loved it, and it meant more to us than it did to potentially anybody else. And that's something that's really cool. And I think that's something that I really resonate with. You know, there's a lot of things, this alternative music scene means a lot more to me than it does to a lot of other people. And a lot of other people don't understand that. And that's okay. But the bottom line is, it means a lot to us. And I know it means a lot to you guys that are out there listening. So we're just going to keep promoting it, listening to all the good stuff that we get, and just trying to tell people how great it is. As far as other tracks on this album, Goalie Shot, Nothing to Show for It, is another just absolute smash of a song. And I think when you look at Good Hangs, they just have such a unique style about them that it's hard not to really fall in love with their tracks as soon as you hear them. And I will say that they are a band that I consistently show people when people are like, who's a newer band or who's a band that I haven't heard of that you think I would like, based off of knowing that I love Blink-182 or that I love Jimmy Eat World or that I love Yellow Card. And Good Hangs tends to be that band. And then I send them this new album, or I send them an old EP from Good Hangs, and they immediately are like, where the fuck has this band been? Why the fuck didn't I know about them? And so that's the cool thing about this, is that being able to introduce people to bands that maybe they haven't heard of before, and that's okay. And it's funny because in one of their albums is a line from someone where it says, "Oh, this is a really good job from a band that I've never even heard of." That's something that happens a lot. That's something that people will say, "Yeah, man, I haven't heard of that band, but they're really good." Well, how about we just say that they're a really good band? Let's not just say, "Oh, because I haven't heard of them, they're actually okay." Like, it's just a very weird way to say things. I'm guilty of it. I'll be the first one to admit it. But what I will say is that hopefully Good Hangs will not be one of those unknown bands for much longer, because this album should catapult them into that next level. I'm really excited to see if they go on any tours this year. Really excited to see if I can catch them live somewhere around here this year. But if not, we have Extremely Fragile, Human Being as one of the better albums that has been released lately. I am going to give this a 9.3 out of 10. This is super close to being a 10 out of 10. And again, this is such a phenomenal album. And it's not just singles, it's the cuts from this album that you didn't hear before this album dropped that make this such a fantastic record. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Extremely Fragile Human Being by Good Hangs. And the last review we're going to talk about is the new EP from Tarnish called A View from My Window. So Tarnish is one of those bands that had one of my top EPs last year, and they start out this year with this EP that's got some really cool artwork on the front with a dog and a dude just kind of staring out a window with kind of an old-timey feel to it. And, going in knowing that this band had one of my top EPs from last year, I had some pretty high expectations. And when I listened to this 4-track EP, my expectations were met. You start off with a track like Where We Stand, which sounds exactly like what you'd expect it to sound like. You kind of know what your status is with someone, but you can see those red flags in real time, and you're trying to figure out, is this really my best way of proceeding? What's my best way of proceeding, with or without? And where do we stand with each other? Then you move into a track like Fracture. And Fracture has one of the cooler vocal deliveries that I've heard from this band, where you get this almost lower tone first, and then you get the first line in this lower tone, and then they switch back to the little bit higher of a tone, which also packs this punch, and then it can switch back down. So it's just a little unique. You don't hear that type of a switch up that quick in that herky-jerky back and forth. But I think when we look at this EP, my favorite song is Promise I Won't Call. And this ended up being one of my favorite tracks from their entire discography. This band is one that came onto my radar when I first started this podcast. And every year they've consistently put out just really strong tracks, really strong EPs. I fully anticipate this one probably staying in rotation all year long. And again, we kind of reached that spot with Tarnish now where we know this band is good. We know this band has such high potential, and they're recognizing their potential. And now it's time for everybody else to recognize and realize what this band is capable of. And I think an EP like A View from My Window is perfect to kind of start the year off and say, we're here, we're Tarnish, we're ready to kind of fucking take over and become something in this scene. So as you know, we do EPs out of 5. This is a 4.5 out of 5 for me. Another one that's very close to being perfect, very similar to the Good Hangs album. But at the beginning of the year, I tend to be a little bit more guarded with giving out 10s out of 10s, or 5 out of 5s. So who knows? Maybe as the year goes on, it'll be one that ends up becoming that. But for now, go check out A View from My Window by Tarnish, their new EP. Wraps it up for reviews, but before we move into kind of who to expect some stuff from this year, I really need to take a second to talk about a band called Left on Red. You may see this band going viral a little bit on Instagram and TikTok for something called Sneezecore. And I picked up my phone and I was scrolling through Reels, and I'm on Instagram and I see something say Sneezecore, and I'm like, what the fuck is Sneezecore? What in the hell is going on here? And so I listened to this song, Pyroceniac by Left on Red. And it has the coolest moment in it, which is this supposed new style called Sneezecore, where the person literally stops the track and says, hold up, I gotta sneeze. And then goes, chew. And I'm not going to try to do a Bleck because it's just going to get poor. But basically the scream is on the chew part of the sneeze. And then it just punches with, I'm allergic to your bullshit in a scream. And it is the catchiest goddamn line, because I will find myself just throughout the day saying literally all of that. And usually these more metalcore, hardcore songs, I don't necessarily find myself saying lines from them all the time, because it's hard to kind of walk around and start, singing a song that might just be a lot of screaming. I don't think anybody really walks around singing a Knocked Loose song in their head, but I think last year we got a taste of that with Suffocate, because you could just scream Suffocate and then kind of do the break in your head. Well, I'm doing the exact same thing here in Pyroceniac with the Achu allergic to your bullshit line. This is a band that's now firmly entrenched on my radar, and I cannot wait to see what else is coming from them, because if this is how we're going to start the year, this can only get better from here. So if you haven't heard it yet, Pyroceniac by Left on Red, it's linked on the playlist in the description of this episode. Go check it out. And also go check out their social media pages where you can see the person do this in real time. I do not remember the name of the singer, and that's on me. I should have looked that up before I came in and did this, but go check them out. Go give them a follow and go give them a listen for Pyroceniac. Last thing I want to talk about is just kind of what to expect in 2025 in this alternative music scene. I think we have a lot to look forward to, and I think this has the potential to be the biggest year that we've seen in a very long time. We obviously know that Warped Tour is coming back. That's going to be a massive, massive thing that comes back. And who knows what it's going to look like. Is it going to be the same? What kind of a lineup are we going to get? What type of amenities are we going to see? How is all of this going to work? Is it going to feel like a Warped Tour? That's going to be something that's really interesting to watch as the summer months come on and we get that first Warped Tour date in June. I will be there for that first Warped Tour date, so I'll be able to give you guys a little bit of an insider look at that. But that's just one of the many things coming this year. In addition to Warped Tour coming, we also got When We Were Young Fest, which has done pretty well the past couple of years. And When We Were Young Fest comes back with a Panic at the Disco reunion with A Fever You Can't Sweat Out being played in full. And I think that really is one of the most interesting storylines to watch this year. As we get closer to that date and as we get closer to Panic reuniting and playing that specific album, I think it'll be interesting to see if this is just a one-off thing. Are we just going to When We Were Young, playing that, and then leaving? Are we going to do some sort of reunion tour where this is something that we actually do throughout the country? Do we put new music out? Have we taken enough of a hiatus? And do we put new music out? And is it similar to A Fever We Can't Sweat Out? Or is it similar to whatever the fuck that atrocity was that just came out 2 years ago? I think that's one of those interesting storylines that we got to wait and see on. And I think we're also set up for an absolute gauntlet of high-powered, highly anticipated releases if they all happen in 2025. When we think about bands that are set to release albums in 2025 or due to potentially release an album in 2025, the list is almost unbelievable in the sense that it's been this long since we've gotten new music, but it's also something that could really energize this scene. So take a second to think about the fact that we might get a new Sleep Token album this year. If we get a new Sleep Token album this year, that will have just meant that 2024 we did not have anything. In 2023, they have one of the best albums of the year. Obviously, everybody out there is still waiting for a new My Chemical Romance album. At this point, anybody's guess is better than mine at this point because I don't think anybody knows what the hell they're doing. But I wouldn't be surprised if they threw one out there at us this year, especially knowing that they're going on tour this summer. Yes, they're really celebrating more of the Black Parade, but it's still a tour, and I think whenever you get a band that does a tour, it's hard not to think that we're going to get some type of new music from them. I think we're due for another Bad Omens album. Obviously, we had the OST last year, which some people would consider a new album, some people wouldn't, but I would not be surprised to see a real new album with new material. Look at a band like Motionless in White. It's been a while since we've heard from them. It's been a while since we got new music from them. I would not be surprised to hear from them. Look at Dayseeker. I think they finally have capped off that last album cycle. And obviously we got Replica last year, and Replica was great, but that was just acoustic covers of their own songs. So it wouldn't be surprising to hear them come out with a new album. I think obviously we had some of the heavy hitters last year with the home team and with Imminence and with Bring Me the Horizon and bands like that. So those are ones that if we get another album this year, it would be a surprise, but it would be a welcome surprise. I think you also have to look at sophomore albums that potentially could drop this year from different bands. Honey Revenge, Arrows in Action, Archetypes Collide, all those bands that were really on my radar in 2023 when we started this podcast and had such a good year, it wouldn't be surprising to hear sophomore albums from them. And I think that's really exciting as well. We have such a good crop of young bands or newer bands to the scene that really have just exploded onto the scene and given us such good music that it's hard to remember that, like, hell, they're only one album in, or hell, they're only an album and an EP in. I think that's something to look forward to as well. In terms of artists to watch, I think it's a little bit harder this year to kind of come up with artists or bands that are really on the horizon, ones to expect big things from. You know, last year when I talked about this, we talked about Imminence, we talked about the home team. We kind of knew that they were setting themselves up to absolutely explode last year, and they did. This year, I don't know that we have any clear-cut bands or artists that are in that category, but I think it's worth mentioning that Magnolia Park's due for an album, and Magnolia Park's also due for just an absolute explosion. They've already kind of hit that peak at this point with last year having a couple of singles and then also doing the Eye to Eye remake for the Disney album. They're right there, and I think they're right there also commercially as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if after this tour that they go on in the spring, if we don't see some absolute fireworks from Magnolia Park. I think bands like Arrows in Action and Brooklyn are very much poised for that kind of same trajectory where they're kind of due to release an album, an EP, as something, and depending on how it shows up and how it comes out, may kind of catapult them into that next level and that next tier of popularity in the scene. And then you also have bands like Hot Mulligan. Like, Hot Mulligan is this band that just always seems to be like an anomaly to me in the sense that they're a band that almost everybody knows and appreciates, but they're always just kind of, I feel like, left behind. They're always just kind of mentioned as, damn, they're really good. And that's just kind of where it stops. You know, even when they released their most recent album in 23, it was one of my favorites, but I even fell victim to that. It was like, oh shit, yeah, Hot Mulligan did release an album in 23. So I think in 25, it wouldn't be all that unheard of to see them kind of explode and blow up, especially after touring with Fall Out Boy last year. I think they're kind of right on the edge with that. That wraps it up for us here on the Matrix Music Review Podcast. I hope you have all enjoyed our first review session of the year. I look forward to doing a lot more of these for you guys this year. I know, like I said, at the end of last year, we just kind of fell off, but we're back, we're moving, and I'm staying up to date with everything. You can expect playlist updates more frequently. You can expect more podcasts more frequently. And if there's something you guys want me to do that's a little extra from the podcast, like, do you want me to dive into a specific band's discography? Do you want to do more brackets like we did for March Sadness last year? Let me know if you have any ideas of things that you want me to look at, things you want me to do, bands you want me to listen to. I'm more than happy to do all that stuff. As always, make sure you're following on all of our social media accounts at Matrix Music Review, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me on all those platforms. You can also find me over on YouTube now. Go over there and subscribe to the YouTube channel Matrix Music Review. And make sure that you're leaving a review, a 5-star review. Let me know how I'm doing with everything. And make sure you go like the playlist, add it to your library so that we can continue to build our little community of alt-rock music lovers. With that, I'm going to get out of here, see what we got coming this week new music-wise, and I should see you very soon with some more reviews.